Uh-oh! Uh-oh! It's that time of the week! It's Saturdays time! Get ready for Kyle and Drew to blow your freaking minds! We got some college football analytics coming your way! Let's go! Get hyped!
You're listening to the Staturdays podcast, presented by Staturdays.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Staturdays podcast live on Facebook. My name is Kyle Bennison. I'm here with my brother Drew, who is back in State College now, and we got a lot to go over tonight. We're talking about the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 that continue to trudge on towards the season. So we're, holding our breath, waiting to see what happens. I think we might see a game or two out of them, but who knows at this point. So we're talking about that. We're looking at a post from our friend Knowles Analytics, who, shout out to Knowles Analytics. This person just pumps out graphs left and right for us to look at and enjoy. A lot of college football analytics going on there. So shout out to them for giving us this to talk about. So they did a really interesting plot on the relationship between offensive line yards and rushing EPA, expected points added. So we're going to look at that, kind of analyze it, break it down. We're also going to tell a story about our vacation. We're back from vacation, and our bikes got stolen. We're going to talk about that. That was kind of a whole fiasco there. So I think that's just something worth sharing since it was a very intense day. And I think Drew
Traumatic.
and I found our calling as criminal investigators. And then last, we're going to talk about Micah Parsons a little bit more. He obviously is opting out of the 2020 season for Penn State. That season isn't really happening anymore, but if they do play in the spring, then he's obviously opting out of that too. So we'll talk a little bit about how that's going to affect Penn State and their defense, and then the team as a whole. So with that being said, let's get started.
All right.
So starting off with conference news, not much has happened since the last time we talked. Like I said, the ACC, Big 12, SEC are all kind of on the same page right now, and they're going full steam ahead. The one piece of news that did come out, or it was kind of like a rumor of what the Big 10 is exploring for their season, was kind of a bubble format. Big 10 weekends. This is something that James Franklin alluded to before, but talking about getting all the teams to go to Minneapolis, where there's a dome, and spend a whole weekend playing football. So something that I would be very excited about. That way you could just lock down the entire weekend from Friday night to Sunday afternoon probably, and just watch Big 10 football. I mean, what's better than that?
Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know how feasible that is, though. Like, just kind of thinking about if it is during the spring semester, you kind of still run into having to put all the teams that want to go into a bubble for, I guess, at least 2 weeks. I don't know exactly how long, but we can say 2 weeks. So it'd be a little tough to do, but it would be awesome if they can make it work. They'd be inside, so the whole Big 10 weather thing that people have been talking about wouldn't really be a problem because in most of the states in the Big 10 it is freezing in February, and even throughout March it can be snowing and things like that. And not that they don't play football in the snow, but at a certain point it's just like really cold to try to play football. So yeah, that's something that would be really cool. But like you said, there's not too much other information out of the other conferences. I think overall it's been fairly quiet the last 2 weeks compared to the couple of very tumultuous and high news cycle weeks where the Pac-12 and Big 10 were canceling. So
there was one piece of news though about Alabama today that and this is not football related, but their students, I guess, have completed a week of school, and I think they brought back about 300 positive tests, or high 100 positive tests for students after a week of school. And I think that was something.
It was around 1% positive rate. I don't remember the exact number
positive
of cases.
rate. Yeah. So I mean, low, but I guess it's not ideal given that they're trying to have there be no cases. With the masking, the social distancing, online learning. I think the goal is that they shouldn't be having any cases. So I think the president or whatever came out and said they need to do a better job. So it'll be interesting if anything like that has an effect on the football team, where even if the football team doesn't get any positive cases, does the school maybe shutting down or going entirely virtual learning have any effect on the football? I'd imagine that it would.
Yeah, and also I don't know exactly when Alabama started, so I can't personally speak to whether those were cases that were like pre-arrival and then they tested when they got there, or if those have been established once they're at school. So I'm not sure when they start. I know I think most southern schools start pretty early in August, like maybe second week or so. So that's also kind of interesting to see because, now that I don't know about most colleges are back, but a lot of colleges are back to see how the cases play out over the next few weeks and how that relates to football. One thing that we did in our first show, or our first show since coming back and doing the live format, is we kind of gave probabilities of seeing one game in each of the remaining three Power Five conferences, as well as seeing a conference championship. And conference championship we kind of defined as, generally accepted as a lot of teams played almost all the games, that type of thing. So
Right.
I'm sure if they didn't, we'd get into a situation where we still see conference champions or things like that. But for the purpose of our discussion, we're talking about a very well-respected conference championship. So roughly kind of the ordering we all had, Kyle was slightly more pessimistic than I was in probability of seeing it in almost every conference. Our rough ordering was the SEC being the most likely, followed by the Big 12, followed by the ACC. When I listened back to our podcast, it was kind of funny because we started with the ACC, then we went to the SEC, and the numbers made sense. And then we went to the Big 12. And although we were saying they're the second most likely, some of the numbers we came up with were actually lower than the first ones. And I think that's just kind of like a recency bias of we were comparing to the SEC.
Yeah.
And it's hard to keep track of everything. So I don't think we need to go through all of them again, but I'm curious if you have any specific changes that you want to make or updates or even just whole conference updates if you think things have changed.
Yeah, so I think so I see here ACC I had at 10%, Big 12 I had at 5%, which should have been higher, I guess. I think the one I want to update is the SEC at 25%. I just feel, I don't think the data backs this up, but I feel like college football is so ingrained in the South that they're going to stop at nothing to play at least one game. I think I really see a game happening somewhere along the lines. I still don't think a conference championship is in the books, especially now with the Alabama news. I think, if they move to virtual classes, I don't know how you can justify bringing the football players in and out of other states and, moving them around and playing contact sports. So that could definitely throw a wrench in things, but I do feel like we're so close. I think we're about a week and a half away or something from the first scheduled kick right now. So I feel like one is going to happen.
Yeah, I when is the first? I feel like they all got moved back, but I still think we're maybe 2 or 3 weeks away.
Well, I follow this account, and I'm not even going to mention it because it's such an annoying account, but it's a college football account, just like a fan account, and they keep tweeting how many days there are until kickoff, and they said 10 days yesterday. I haven't looked it up to back it up, but they seem pretty confident in it, and they tweet it every single day. They say 10 days, 9 days, 8 days. So it's like, and the comment section is brutal, but so that's what I'm going off of.
Yeah, so in terms of updating our previous predictions, I kind of want to move everyone up a little bit just for making it this far. I think part of what was driving my decisions and my probabilities the first time was the theory that even though they don't all move in concert, that the Power Five would be more influenced by the Big Ten
Right.
and the Pac-12. Whereas I feel like if anything, it invigorated the other conferences even more
Yeah, they
to
didn't
play.
budge.
And not that the people on Twitter are making the decision, but I feel that even the coaches and there have been outspoken, high power people in these other conferences. I think this isn't going to be right. I forget what it is. Let's say Mississippi State or Mississippi, maybe their AD or someone in a powerful position down there had said like, I guess tailgating had been canceled in the SEC or at their school something, and they were kind of making a joke that they'd rather have football with no tailgating in the SEC than no football like the Big Ten. So
Yeah.
not that that speaks for everyone, but I would actually move up maybe everyone's probabilities, another 10 points or so.
Okay.
Like you said, we're getting pretty close to kick, and generally it seemed like things with coronavirus cases have been trending in the right direction recently. When we were talking before, I think we were more out of like a static
Yeah.
or slightly increasing, whereas now there seems to be some slightly better news going on. So we'll have to see. But overall, I think I'm moving up from where we first put it 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with all that. And it looks like the first game that doesn't have a canceled or postponed next to it is Thursday, September 3rd, Central Arkansas at UAB, 8 p.m. in Alabama. And then that same night, South Alabama at Southern Mississippi. So I'm not sure exactly what conference that is, but those are the first ones that I see on the ESPN schedule.
Okay, so the 10
Alabama
days.
doesn't play until the end of September right now.
Yeah, so the 10 days could be till any football is played, where
Yeah.
I guess we're thinking more the Power Five, I guess, is all the third or fourth week of September, it seems like then.
Yeah.
Waiting a little longer. So
All right. So, quick little interlude here before we get to the Knowles Analytics, EPA, and line yards plot. We went on vacation last week to LBI, and LBI is a nice family-friendly beach in New Jersey, an island actually, Long Beach Island, and unfortunately, we were a little naive and we thought that it was fine to just leave all our bikes out. We brought all our bikes down, so we had, I think, 5 bikes. And Drew and I have kind of nicer hybrid bikes that were kind of stowed in the back of the house, like on the ground floor. And then we had some of our less nice bikes and my girlfriend's bike out front. And one morning we woke up and they were gone. So my mom, being the smart woman that she is, posted in the lost and found group for LBI, the entire island, and said, "We lost these 2 bikes." And lo and behold, a few hours, and we told the police as well, and we didn't really think anything would come of that because we're like, people probably lose bikes all the time. But lo and behold, what pulled through for us was the Facebook group. Someone posted, and they didn't have pictures, but they said, "Oh, I just saw both of your bikes at this restaurant." So,
which was only a couple of minutes from where we were on the beach.
Yeah, I mean, we had to drive there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were on the beach and we hear that, and I think my mom's first instinct was to call the police. Drew, and my girlfriend's first instinct was, well, let's go right now. So we
get them ourselves.
Sprinted to the car. We headed over there, got there in about 8 minutes. I think our response time was 8 minutes or so. Took a look, did not see the bikes. A little disappointing. And got back in our car, and the police pulled up as we were leaving. So faster response time than the police there. And then we saw them kind of take a look, also not see the bikes, and walk away.
Pretty brief look.
What'd you say?
Pretty brief check.
Yeah, they were there
the
probably
LBI
30 seconds. And then, so we get back to the beach, and almost immediately when we walked back to the beach, my girlfriend looks at the Facebook group, and she says, someone else just posted and said they saw the bikes. And at this point, we're thinking, is this just like a wild goose chase and they're just making this up, or is this a legit lead again? So it was at the Acme grocery store, which was also just like a 2-minute drive. So we're like, all right, let's ride again. Sprint back to the beach house, get in the car, go to the Acme, and there are both of our bikes right in the parking lot, abandoned in a parking space like it was a car. And all I'm thinking is, what kind of criminal steals your bike, or steals 2 bikes, and then rides both bikes around together, like not expecting anything to happen?
Yeah, there were a lot of competing theories, I guess, of what was going on. If it was professional bike thief team, if it was just 2 kids, whatever it could have been. And I guess we still don't really know, but at the end of the day, we did a pretty good job and gotten our bikes back.
We did.
And it's a real testament to the Facebook community who were
Yeah.
being vigilant. We don't know if the first one was like a false positive there, fake report, not a fake report. I don't think that would really be something that people do. But it is two bikes, so if they saw them both together, that's pretty high chance. But
Yeah.
it's also a bike, so you could probably easily misidentify it and just be 50 feet away, like, oh, that looks like them.
Yeah, no, that definitely helped that we had both bikes together in the pictures. And I think we should also note that we beat the police to the Acme as well, because the woman who posted the second time saying your bikes are at the Acme, she actually called the police herself, which shout out to this woman, Carol. Her name is actually Carol, who called the cops for us. We beat the police there as well. And then we got the bikes, we put them in our car, and then we were like, well, the police are on the way, so we probably shouldn't just like bail or they'll chase us down. So we actually waited for the police to show up, and the guy finally pulls up to us after we had to wave at him for about 5 minutes. And he pulls up and he's like, what's up? And we told him the situation, and he basically said, oh, you guys lost your bikes and you found them? Awesome. And that was that.
I thought we would at least get, radio it in, like clear the case.
Yeah.
Close the file up, something.
Get your names.
It was nothing. But, we bested the criminals. I don't know if they wanted us to find them when they abandoned them in one of the most populated parts of Long Beach Island, probably at the Acme. But we won at the end of the day, and we locked them up for the rest of the week.
Yeah, so there you go. Lock your bikes, everyone. And I think Drew and I found a new calling here as kind of maybe private investigators. I know for me, man, what an adrenaline rush.
Oh, yeah.
Riding down the street, chasing after these bad guys and closing the case.
Yeah, it was a great time. Added some excitement. We got a good workout running from the beach twice. So,
yeah.
All in all, not a bad time.
All right. So let's talk college football analytics again. What we're looking at is the plot from Knowles Analytics. This is a Seminoles Twitter account. So Florida State. This, like I said, this guy or girl just pumps out plots left and right. So I think this could be a weekly segment where we just look at something that they've created. I mean, I need to get our lessons from this person because they do a very good job at just knocking them out. But so what we're looking at here on the right is a comparison between offensive line yards and expected points added, EPA, per rushing attempt. So first off, let me just recap line yards. We've talked about this in the past, and then we've put on our website as well. But line yards are basically a very rudimentary way of measuring how well an offensive line is doing at run blocking. There, especially in college football, there are pretty much no stats that directly track the offensive line. I'm not really familiar with what they do in the NFL to measure that, but Football Outsiders came up with a way of basically giving credit to the offensive line for the early parts of a run. And that means that when a running back loses yards on a play, the offensive line loses 1.2 yards for every yard that the running back loses. So you can think of it like at the end of the game, the running back has 95 yards. The offensive line might have 50 yards or something like that. 50 line yards. So the measurement is 1.2 times any negative yards. And the theory behind that is if a running back is kind of getting stuffed behind the line, that's the failing of the offensive line in letting defenders through so quickly. So that's why you get kind of knocked a little bit more for a negative run play. For short runs of 0 to 5 yards, the offensive line gets what is this? Okay, so for the first 0 to 4 yards, the offensive line gets complete credit. So 1 times the first 4 yards. So from 1 to 4, they also get 4 yards if it's a 4-yard run. Now from 5 to 10, the line gets half a yard per yard. and that reason is that at that point, I mean, they're kind of setting up blocks, but the running back is eventually going to kind of outrun the line, and then at that point, all the credit kind of goes to the running back. So anything outside of 10 yards, 11 plus yard runs, from 11 to the end of the run, all the credit goes to the running back at that point. So you kind of weight it as the run goes on. So the first part of the run, you get full credit, and then it diminishes until the offensive line doesn't get any more credit. So the max line yards you could get on any single rush is actually 7, which is 4 plus half of 5. That doesn't sound right. It's something like that. I think it's 7. But anyways, so that's what line yards are. And then expected points added we've talked about in the past, but it's basically situational, improvement or worsening of your chances of scoring a point based on the outcome of a play. So, when you look at a situation, you say, okay, in all the 1st and 10s from your own 20, on average, how many points are scored on a drive that is currently in this position? And you might say, well, on average, 2.5 points are scored every time you start from your own 20. And it's probably lower than that. Now, let's say the running back busts off a 50-yard run, and now you're at the opponent's 30. Yeah, 30. Now, what you're going to have is a new expected points for the next play. So now it's 1st and 10 at the opponent's 30. And, at that point, you're probably going to get a field goal, maybe more. So maybe your expected points are 3.5. So if before it was 2.5 and now it's 3.5, the expected points added on that particular rush was 1 point. So, Drew, do you want to talk a little bit more about, what we see exactly on the graph here then?
Yeah, and just to go back to the line yards real quick. I think the max might be 8 if it's half of 10 plus 1 times 3. So I think you just came up with 7 instead of 8.
Struggling
but
with the mental math.
The math on the fly is never a good idea, to be honest. It's always harder once you start talking.
Wrote it down.
But so basically what you can see in this graph, you have the offensive line yards along the x-axis, and then going up the y-axis, you have EPA per rush. So like Kyle said, you can have EPA for every play because, plays follow another play. So you can have general EPA, and this is just restricting it to looking at rushing plays to kind of get to that running back thing. So basically what we see here is, an extremely strong correlation. He or she actually put it on the graph, which is great. An R of 0.76. So a perfect correlation would be 1, and that would mean there's a perfectly linear increase for every X offensive line yards equals Y increase in EPA per rush. So they're always going to be equal to the exact same. They're always going to be lined up linearly as you go up the line. So obviously most things don't have a perfect correlation of 1. But if you look at the graph, this is like extremely high correlation for something that you would just look up and kind of be poking around with. So what the graph kind of tells you is that as the offensive line yards increase, the EPA per rush also increases. So as the line gets better and is earning more offensive line yards, the average EPA per rush increases. And this makes a lot of intuitive sense, but even for things like this where you could be like, oh, that's obvious looking back at it, it's always good to kind of actually do the work and also graph it, especially because not only can you point out specific teams, like if you look at the graph, you can see Clemson over there all the way to the right and all the way up, which means they had the highest offensive line yards and the highest EPA per rush. I'm assuming this is just Power 5 conferences, but I'm not 100% sure. And so, yeah, even if you might look back and be like, oh, this was, nice and obvious, it's really not, and it's nice to kind of put it on a graph, and especially with the team logos here, it's nice to kind of see everything and kind of visualize that correlation.
Yeah, there's some kind of interesting cases where, you look at a team like Washington State there, up in the top, they're in the top middle of the graph, and they've really outperformed their line yards compared to the rest of college football. It looks like that for less line yards on average, they're actually getting a higher EPA per rush. So what does that look like in reality? It could be better field position. It could be they're rushing in situations where they're scoring the ball, because actually that would actually make a lot of sense. They're a heavy passing team, so when they rush, maybe they're not averaging very high line yards, but maybe they are adding a lot to their expected points, or actually scoring touchdowns on those running plays.
Yeah, because even just going off of that, the EPA even being like inside the 10, it's not a perfect 7 points. You're not expected to score 7 points. It's probably, if you're first and 10 on the 10, it might be 6 something. I'm not actually sure the number, but it's not 7. So yeah, like you said, if you're a team that rushes heavily on the goal line but doesn't rush heavily elsewhere, your offensive line might not be the best elsewhere, but if you punch it in a lot, your EPA will really benefit from that, because the EPA per rush there is maybe 0.25 or so. So if you are rushing in a 6.8 EPA situation or expected point situation, you score a touchdown, that's 0.2 EPA right there.
Right.
And 6.8 means you're probably within the 5-yard line at that point because you're so close.
Right. And yeah, it could be that they're only rushing at like the goal line or something, where on average maybe not every team is scoring there, but maybe if they are, then they're not going to average many line yards there, but they would increase their EPA. So yeah, that's definitely something to note there. But it kind of the title of the graph is "It's hard to separate the line from the runner." I think maybe a better way of saying that is it's hard to separate the line from the run. I think a good kind of follow up to this would be to look at the line yards, the average line yards per rush versus the average total yards per rush, and then maybe you'd be able to see kind of a deviation where well they're actually averaging low line yards on average, but their total yards are very high, and that could be a Journey Brown kind of player who really breaks out into the open and adds a lot to the end of the runs, and that can be really valuable if it's done on a semi-consistent basis. So I think something like that would be really interesting to look at as well.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing about this graph, but also more generally, is it kind of leads to the question of, where can you go next with offensive line stats? Because this isn't a problem with the graph or, with the data or anything. This is just the current state of the situation. But offensive line yards and EPA per rush aren't really independent of each other, because
Right.
if you have an amazing running back, if you have a super running back who can do anything you can imagine, which doesn't exist, but they could have a terrible offensive line, always
Yeah.
make solid gains even if the line breaks down, and you can't really parse that out of offensive line yards.
Right, because the offensive line gets credit for the first 10 yards. So if you think of like Saquon Barkley and a lot of the runs that he has where he gets caught in the backfield because the line kind of falls apart, but yet he makes an impressive move that actually turns what should be a 2-yard loss into a 10-yard run. I mean, I can't even think of how many times I've seen this happen. But if you look at that on paper, the offensive line just got 7 yards of credit for a run that really maybe Barkley did 12 yards on his own. So
Yeah.
there's not a really good way in college football right now to deal with that situation. And I think Football Outsiders, when they describe line yards, acknowledges that it's a kind of blind metric where we don't know a lot about the factors that went into the play, just kind of the outcome. So I think it's good looking at like averages, but like if you're looking at individual games or trying to evaluate too heavily just based on that stat, it's very limited. And it kind of is similar to ELO, where ELO doesn't know everything about the teams that it's evaluating. ELO doesn't know that Micah Parsons is sitting out this season. So all of that kind of has to play catch up once the season starts and Elo starts to realize, the defense isn't looking as good as it used to, or something like that.
Yeah, and I think also, we say the offensive line could be unfairly credited with points, but the opposite is also true. You can have situations where a running back tries to do too much,
Yeah.
which I think you can go back to Saquon, and there are times when he
Hey.
could have gotten 3 yards, and then he gets tackled in the backfield. And a lot of times it works because he's Saquon Barkley, but there are those other times, and to offensive line yards, they're saying, "What are you guys doing?" And maybe there are times when he could have just gotten 3 yards, and then the offensive line gets all 3 of those yards. So
Right.
yeah, I think I think it's maybe Pro Football Focus. I think have been working on some more advanced stats for the NFL side of offensive linemen. Looking at how long they hold their blocks and things like that. So
That's because they just literally have like a room of guys that watch football film all day long, right?
yeah, pretty much. So I think the offensive line stat category is definitely underserved right now because even before we have offensive line yards, a lot of how you judge offensive linemen to draft and things like that, it's more subjective than it is. At least once you have this, you can narrow down maybe teams and things. But before that, you're looking at size or you're watching film. So there's definitely a lot of improvements that can be made with offensive line statistics. And I think that'll help the question of separating running backs and linemen even more.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Anything else on this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So, thank you again to Knowles Analytics. You can follow him on Twitter, and you can get stuff like this all the time, and then we can talk about it. So, thank you again to him for posting this and getting the chance to talk about it tonight. So, last subject that we're going to talk about tonight is Micah Parsons. So, we kind of touched on it earlier, and this is going to be kind of a free form, not too analytically driven, but he's obviously opting out of the season. Penn State is, he was a All-American, linebacker as a sophomore or whatever it was, and he was going to be one of the top defensive players in the country going into his junior year. So obviously a tough decision for him, but the question remains now is, so how does that affect Penn State? And I think Penn State's lost a lot of good players over the years, and as do all teams, and they always seem to kind of get by even with some of those big losses. So it kind of begs the question, what is the effect going to be for Penn State this year, and in general, how much is a defense impacted by one single player realistically?
Yeah, I believe this is a difficult question to kind of quantify, and it is just a hard question, one of those ones that doesn't have an easy answer. And I think my answer is that players are probably typically overvalued in college football for their individual team when you have star players. Maybe not in a single season, but definitely moving to the next season, let's say. The way college football works is when you're constantly recruiting and you're constantly bringing in these high talent players, the next season you might not have another Saquon Barkley. You might not have another Micah Parsons, but if you take Saquon Barkley, he got replaced with Miles Sanders, who is no slouch, and that's not a rare occurrence. It's not rare that you replace a first round draft pick with another first round draft pick. I think within a single season, it can have a bigger loss if that player gets injured. I'm thinking of maybe like a star running back or star wide receiver.
Right.
If you're within the season where you don't have the off season to train up that next player, and there's always people ready, but when you have a star player go out in the middle of a season, I think that has a larger effect than it does between seasons in college football. But going back to kind of your original question of a defensive player, compared to a quarterback, the value has to be a lot lower.
A lot lower.
And on my way to school, I don't remember the exact podcast I was listening to because I listened to a bunch in a row, but I believe it was a Freakonomics podcast where they were talking about sports betting, and they were talking to someone, and they basically had done some more of the research and legwork and found that the betting lines move a lot more for injuries than they should. Like basically they shouldn't move at all for injuries that aren't to the quarterback, and then for the quarterback they even move too much when you have star quarterbacks go down. So they did a little bit more of like the research part of it and trying to see how the betting lines change with players, which doesn't mean that the betting lines are always the most correct, but I think they're heading in the right direction in saying that overall players shouldn't be too valued in a single season if they're not the quarterback.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much agree with you there, especially with the recruiting part. I mean, I think we talked about it last week, but, recruiting in college football is a lot different than the NFL, and it's very cyclical where the best teams get the best recruits, and it kind of happens over and over again. And you think of a team like Alabama, who's, the top tier. Every year they have a great running back, and every year they have a Heisman contender. Now on the defensive side, I don't know if middle linebackers are as hard to come by, but the point being is that they've got guys in the pipeline, and I think it's a good point that if you lose a guy in the middle of the season, then that can have bigger effects because you don't have your next class in. Your backups may not have been mentally prepared or physically prepared to take on as many snaps as they're going to. So I think that definitely has a bigger impact than just a normal like year-to-year departure. Hopefully for Penn State, in their case, they have a lot of lead time now. At least a couple more months where they know what they're dealing with, so that can help the guys that are currently there. And then depending on what happens with the season, I'm sure their incoming class is going to be able to pick up a good portion of the slack. And no, maybe you don't get a Micah Parsons level guy that could go round 1 or 2 or whatever it might be. But if you can fill in the pieces and make up most of the stuff that you lost, then I think you'll suffice. And just to go over a few of Micah Parsons' stats from last year, he was number 3 in total tackles in the Big Ten last year. He was number 4 in forced fumbles with 4. So small sample size, and I think we've talked about fumble recoveries are random. I don't know if forced fumbles are random. I would think that might be a little bit more predictive from year to year, even though it is a low number that, guys that try to get fumbles can at least force them, and whether you recover them is up to randomness. So I think, he's one of the top ranked players in the country at the position. So you're definitely going to fall off a little bit, but at the same time, like we talked about last week, I said Elo doesn't know that Micah Parsons is gone, but Elo does know that the teams regress each year just based on all the factors that go into year-over-year turnover, whether it's a coach leaving, whether it's a quarterback graduating, whether it's just, year-to-year random variability. We do discount each team's score a little bit so that the worst teams might be a little bit better next year. The best teams might start out a little bit worse until they can prove us otherwise. I think they'll be able to, weather the storm there.
Yeah, and kind of going back to, I guess, his position, position, I don't know what's going on there, himself as a middle linebacker. When you think of the NFL draft, a lot of the positions who are going first aren't necessarily middle linebackers. You can think of maybe a really strong defensive tackle or even an offensive lineman who might have more of a effect on their team than a middle linebacker was. I think on the podcast too, they even mentioned maybe like J.J. Watt or someone who's just, a real force on the field who everyone knows is making a difference. And not that, Micah Parsons or even the position isn't making a difference, but there's definitely some variability within other positions. Even if we want to say quarterback is, far and above the most important for kind of keeping that same level of play, I think when you have a really skilled player, a tight end or a offensive lineman, there can be situations where they affect the team more. But overall, I think it's over exaggerated of losing a single player.
Yeah, I mean, think back to, and this is just one example, but the Eagles in 2017, who dealt with so many injuries and they still ended up winning a Super Bowl. I think there's definitely a overreaction when it comes to just a single injury. Obviously, piling up does take a toll. Like last year with the Eagles, it didn't really work out for them because there were just too many, and they were playing with, practice squad wide receivers. But definitely the impact of one person might not be felt as much, except for the quarterback. And it's kind of interesting because the quarterback is such an important position there.
Yeah. And if you guys have any different opinions on this, or just kind of want to let us know what you're thinking of as the most important position, or how much an individual can impact a single team, definitely let us know on Twitter at Staturdays. Love to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. So with that comes to the end of our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Once again, you can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple. And we look forward to continuing this. We'll see what happens with college football. Hopefully we get some games in and we can start talking about, the week 1 predictions for who's going to, come out on top. But for now, stay safe, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you, everyone.
You're listening to the Staturdays podcast presented by Staturdays.com.